It wasn't long after that before the authorities in Sweden brought charges against your husband in relationship to sexual misconduct. That was in 2010. It's very interesting to me that it was Sweden. Your husband, Julian, described Sweden as the Saudi Arabia of feminism, which I thought was a pretty nice phrase, by the way. And there's definitely something to be said about that. And that was also at the height or in the prodroma to the Believe All Women and Me Too, what would you call it, brouhaha, and the insistence that if any charges of sexual misbehavior were ever brought against someone, that it was incumbent on everyone to assume that the victim was telling the truth. And of course, that violates the presumption of innocence. It often violates your right to face your accuser. And it's preposterous on the face of it, because what that does is enable anyone who's manipulative or devious or psychopathic to use the entire weight of the legal system as a weapon, which is happening so often now that it's almost beyond comprehension. And it seems a bit too convenient in some real sense that these charges emerged just at the time that was most appropriate in some real pragmatic sense for the authorities in the UK and the US. But I'd ask you also more personally, I mean, you married this man, you had an affair with him for a long time, you have 2 children together. For some reason, either you didn't believe the charges and the allegations, or you saw something in Julian that superseded them of value. And this is a deeper question too. I mean, you've got tangled in this pretty deeply, and you could have had a much simpler life. And so why are you on his side? Why isn't it reasonable just to assume that Julian Assange is a narcissistic troublemaker with a proclivity for sexual impropriety? And why do you believe that so deeply that, well, in some real sense, you were willing to stake your whole life on it? And why aren't you just being played? And I'm not saying that you are, but obviously those are the questions that all the people who are launching allegations against your husband and you, those are the claims that they're putting forward, essentially.
Well, Julian is the man I know. The man I married, I know, wouldn't do those things. And in fact, the way he's described is the exact opposite of who he is. And that's not how I came into this, though. I came into it in a professional capacity, precisely in the context of these Swedish allegations. And you made a mistake, which is completely understandable, because you read everywhere that Julian was charged, but in fact, he was never charged. There was only ever a...
okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was only ever a so-called preliminary investigation, and it was dropped on 4 separate occasions.
So why was there an extradition order if it was only a preliminary investigation?
Right,
or is that exactly the issue?
No, look, that is a very good question. And in fact, Julian's case went all the way to the Supreme Court. He lost, and the UK Supreme Court said he should be extradited to Sweden. And then they said, and we have to change the law so this doesn't happen again, because you need a charge before we extradite, but it won't be retrospective.
Oh, I see.
So they legislated, I see. But carved out a little exception for Julian so he wouldn't benefit from it. And that has been the norm again and again and again, that somehow Julian is treated as the exception, and then we're going to fix it afterwards.
What were the allegations exactly? What were the Swedish allegations? And how many people brought them forward? And why weren't they pursued?
So according, there were 2 women, and according to their own account, they went to the police because they had found out that both of them had slept with Julian within a week, and they wanted Julian to have an HIV test. That is their reason, according to their own account, for going to the police.
And you can go to the police in Sweden for that reason?
Well, who knows? But just to put this in context.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so Julian had just published the Afghan war logs in July, 25th of July, I think it was, or so. The Swedish preliminary investigation was opened on the 20th of August. But in between that, even before he went to Sweden, there was an article in the Daily Beast which said that the US State Department was telling its allies to find a way to stop Julian in his tracks and to find a way to prosecute him. And they knew that Julian still had to publish the Afghan war logs and the diplomatic cables. The Iraq war logs. The Iraq war logs were published in October, and the diplomatic cables on the 29th of November. Sweden issued its Interpol arrest warrant on the 30th of November, one day later. Julian voluntarily went to the police station and lost his liberty on the 7th of December 2010. He was put in prison for 10 days, then he was under house arrest for a year and a half. He was in the embassy for 7 years, then he was arrested, and he's been in Belmarsh High Security Prison ever since.
So the women wanted him to undergo an HIV test, but that's still not allegation of misbehavior. Although who knows in Sweden, what were the specific allegations? And you said the allegations were dropped before formal charges were brought on 4 separate occasions. So what were the allegations?
So there are 4 allegations, 3 in relation to one woman and 1 in relation to the other. The single allegation which was most serious is what they called lesser rape. So there are 3 degrees of rape in Sweden, and this was the lesser degree, in the sense that there was no physical coercion. And the allegation is that Julian initiated sex when the woman was asleep.
What's your understanding of how it is that both of these charges emerged simultaneously?
No charges. Allegations.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Jeez. Allegations. Yeah.
You know, they didn't know each other. They met on one occasion. They knew that the second woman contacted the first one, and then they spoke to each other, and they found out they had both slept with Julian, and then they both went. That's their story, that they went to the police because they wanted an HIV test because he had slept with them in this short period.
Okay.
I don't see any point in me speculating about that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, could you speculate about the motivation of the second Swedish agent, so to speak, who took on the 2 women as clients and who had a political stake in the issue? What exactly was she up to, and why? And why did she want to question Julian?
It was a man. His name was Claes Borgström.
Oh, sorry.
And it was a close call in that general election in Sweden. And he was tipped to be the new justice minister if they won the case. If they won the election, sorry. And incidentally, one of the 2 women was also running for politics. So in that same election for a local seat. And she actually, there are text messages as well between the women where they're talking about that they can get money if they tell their story and stuff. So it's a little bit,
I see.
yeah.
So there's lots of moral hazard involved in many different directions.